Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm back, baby.
After a few weeks, Maul's back.
I'm back. I'm Maul.
Yeah, so bringing him back, you had to deal with me for a few episodes of the solo, but we're getting back. Week 8 of college football, Week 7 NFL. We'll record later tomorrow. We'll get that episode out to you this week. But as always, past and present, Maul's back, so he gets to go this time. I've been supplying all these answers for you guys the last few weeks. So you want past or present first?
Let's do present first.
Present. All right, so this one comes from our buddy Pops. He was like, you need to ask Maul, see if he knows. Where did Tyreek Hill go to school?
Western Michigan.
Nope. You're not Western. It is West, but it's not Western Michigan.
Ooh. Dang, I literally...
Do you know what school he got kicked out of before he went to Western Michigan? Or not to Western Michigan, but to...
I don't know that.
He was Oklahoma State before going and graduating from this college.
I literally just looked this one up not too long ago because I thought about giving it because obviously of how prolific he is right now, but I thought it was some school like Western Michigan or something like that.
Close.
It's West something?
It's West something.
How about, I don't know, West?
It's not out West. I'll give you that.
West Virginia.
No.
Western.
It's in the South. Prolific state. Like you would think that like he came out of this and went to this. He went to this school in this state. Of all the other 2 schools that he really could have gone to in this state, he chose this one.
So, like, he could have been to Alabama or Auburn, and instead he went to Western Alabama?
West Alabama.
Wow.
West Alabama. Of all, like, that's what sort of, it's funny as we've been watching the games today and we've been talking about quarterbacks. You mentioned, like, Joe Flacco. Like, here's a guy that, yes, he wins the Super Bowl. I think he gets a lot of hate, like, now, but, like, Delaware. Like, I always sit back and I wonder, like, what would that guy have been like if he was at Alabama?
So, I mean,
like,
I remember that draft, and I remember watching, like, film of Joe Flacco, and I was like, dude, this guy's the real deal. Like, big, tall kid, could throw the rock. He was really good coming out of college. Now, I don't think he's as good as, like, a lot of people will maybe give him credit for. Some people are like, oh, he won a Super Bowl. He's elite, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not putting Joe Flacco in the elite camp. He was a good quarterback, but I'm not putting him in, Hall of Fame or anything like that. So
no, I mean, it's not that. It more amazes me. Like, how does a guy not even go to a Power 5 school like that? Like, and nothing against Bryce Young, but here's a guy that is barely like probably 5'10". Now, extremely like talented for the size that he is. But the fact that, like, you just have these guys, like even Herbert, like Herbert goes to Oregon, not really a quarterback school. I get it's still a Power 5 school, but you're just like, of all the powerhouses, like how is Georgia right now? It's like Georgia, you sit back in and look at them with Beck. And that's sort of we'll get into it with a college episode of like, there's so many teams right now that would pay to have a Joe Flacco in their program. And you just sort of look at it and you're like, how do these guys just like continually get missed?
There's just, I don't know. I feel like that's just a sheer numbers game. There's just so many athletes, like coming in and out of, we'll get into it, but I mean, dudes that are juniors in high school getting 6-figure deals. Obviously that stuff wasn't happening back in then, but it's just the sheer number of people that are coming out. It's just bound to. And a lot of times it's like, you never know, like guys like Herbert. It's like, yes, they could have went to a different school or they get missed on, but sometimes it's just like they're those hometown kids that just want to play for, wherever they're at kind of thing.
It's funny that you bring up that. I don't know if you know this. We will get into this guy more in the NFL episode for what you talked about earlier. Trevor Lawrence, where did he want to go to school?
Georgia?
No. Tennessee. His
Why?
idol growing up was Peyton Manning.
Oh.
And
I knew he was from Georgia.
Butch Jones did not even talk to him. Like, they didn't talk to him, and literally when it came, they thought that he was just going to be in the bag for Tennessee, and by the time they went to him, he was like, no, I'm going to Clemson. Like, you guys didn't care about me. Like, you look at, like, how would that have changed, like, the trajectory of, like, college sports? Like, there's always those guys that it's like, I would have died to have gone and played for this school. That was the school I wanted to growing up, but you guys didn't care about me. And then they go on to have these careers and then you look back and you're like, yo, that's why Butch Jones got fired.
Yeah.
Like, pretty simple. All right, passed.
Okay, passed.
So there's a player that's going to come to mind when I mention this school, and this is your other hint. It's not him. It's somebody else.
Okay.
College, because it surprised me. There's only 2 guys really to ever come out of this college. College is Villanova. Plays for the Eagles and then the Niners.
Villanova.
Do you know who I was talking about?
Howie Long go to
Howie
Villanova?
Long's
Okay.
He's the only Hall of Fame player to come out of this school. So this guy wasn't Hall of Fame. Your first hint, 2002, round 3, pick 91.
Villanova. You said, all right, so Villanova,
Eagles,
and
just 1 year at the Niners.
1 year at the Niners. So primarily Eagles. And he went to Villanova. Offense or defense?
Offense. And this is sort of this. It's I think a good hint. Like, when you think about this guy, like him and McNabb, they were just a duo. Like, it's in that time period where, like, this guy, here's your other hint, not a wide receiver. So, if that doesn't err, it's a running back.
Deuce Staley?
No, it wasn't Deuce. I always remember this guy. Maybe it was just because, like, I found that anytime, like, the Packers played him, like, this guy he just always found a way to, like, impact the game for the running back position.
I know when you say his name, I know I'm going to know who it is, but I don't know who it is.
Brian Westbrook.
Brian, okay, yep.
And I just, like, I know that's a little bit of a deeper pool, but, like, it's we were talking before we turned it on of, like, the Eagles backfield situation. It's like, you sort of think about, like, historic Eagles running backs, especially, like, since 2000. Brian Westbrook, Deuce Staley, Shady, and now, like, they've
DeMarco Murray
for 1 year.
Jay Ajayi.
Yeah. Dude, Jay Ajayi's, like, that's a guy that you sit back and you're like, dude, like, has these amazing, like, year, and then it's over. Now, Brian he was a part of that sort of, like, stable of backs that they had,
yeah.
Which is sort of funny. It's like before we really got into, he was sort of in that last group of, like, hey, franchise running backs, and now it's more committee by backfield. But I thought with being a small school like Villanova, I looked them up, like, only 40-something guys have ever gotten drafted
from
Villanova.
I'm surprised it's even that high.
And I couldn't, outside of Brian Westbrook and Howie Long, could not tell you another guy. Like, I looked at the list and I was like, I don't recognize this.
I definitely didn't remember Brian Westbrook probably for the Niners.
Yeah. So, for the Niners, no way. I only remember as my Eagle. But, this episode, college episode, what we'll do this episode is we're just going to go through some of the Week 8 matchups. We'll talk about each of the teams, some of the bigger, like, takeaways. I think probably the biggest takeaway to come away at the beginning is, if you're Michigan State, the thing that you don't put on your video board is a picture of Hitler.
What? Like,
we'll throw the photo on the podcast for those of you watching on YouTube, but some Michigan State, intern is up there, like, playing trivia. And
how
they're
many
like,
people's eyes had to see that and go, like, sign off on it? Like, yeah, let's ask them that question. That'll stump them.
The question was, where was Hitler born? And
or,
it was,
like, what year was he born or something?
No, it was where.
Where?
Because the answer was Austria. And they were like, and it's like, are we in, like, world, history?
Who cares?
Yeah, we're at a football game.
This is a Michigan State game. We're talking about, it would have been, now, I'm not saying, like, it would have been better, but, like, it would have been one thing if it was like, oh, he was born in East Lansing or, something.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not the case. But, like, what are you doing?
Or even if they had made, like, a really bad joke and been like, he was born in Ann Arbor.
Like it was a sports bar trivia question at the game.
But to sit back and throw that out, like, hey, we're going to make this about, but that sums up Michigan State's program, because they look terrible. And then as we were just talking about earlier, like I brought it up on the solo podcast, like Michigan's defense, I mean, they get the goose egg, get the shutout. Like I'd argue when you look at the top 10, top 10, 15 teams in the nation, they get the best defense.
Oh, yeah,
like,
by far.
Now, we were sort of, for those of you out there who are going to sit back and be like, well, they haven't played anyone, I get that argument, but at the same time, they're still playing football teams.
Yeah, I mean, they're still playing like Division I, FBS, Power 5 opponents. And, I mean, we all know that the game is written, or it's intended for offense to score.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the way the game is going nowadays. Like people want to see offense score. So when you can go out there and play against other college opponents and not let them score any points, let alone, whatever they're averaging, under 10 or 10 I think is their average. It's impressive.
It's less than 10. Like they've only given up 10 once to Minnesota. In the other games, it was like 3-3-6 and the rest were 7s. This was their first goose egg that they were able to, hold a team to nothing. But I like sit back and look at it and I go, Georgia's given up 20 to Vanderbilt. And you pointed out, like, if Vanderbilt hadn't missed that kick, Georgia's in the first quarter's down like 10-0.
10-0, just like that.
And you sit back and it has to mean something. Now, ultimately for Michigan, we're not really going to know. I'd argue we're not going to know who they are against Penn State or, in my opinion, Ohio State, because after watching that game, it was a high school football game.
It was like so boring to watch.
Dude, I don't know if you noticed.
They're well, not, I don't know about the Penn State. Is the Ohio State quarterback a freshman?
No.
I
don't think McCord is. I mean, I can take a look at it.
He was playing like a freshman.
He looked awful.
It was bad. It looked like backups. It just looked like backups out there.
Yeah, Kyle McCord, he's not listed at the roster of Ohio State. Shocking after that bad of a game. He's a junior. But, like, you watch that game, and for me, like, the thing I noticed is they're spreading the field. Like, literally, they're on the opposite hash, and they're putting Marvin Harrison Jr. on the far side of the field on the sideline. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to create open space in between corners, so that, hey, this guy has more of an advantage to just create some separation.
I mean, he was clearly the best athlete on the field, so like you understand the scheme.
Well, they were doing it,
like,
but the thing was, like McCord couldn't put it within arm reach of Marvin Harrison Jr.
It was such a bad, boring game to watch.
Yeah, both quarterbacks horrendous, and it's funny. We got a buddy that's huge Michigan fan, and he texts me. He's like, so pretty much it's just like, is Michigan going to beat these teams by 70? Like, which
they're already looking forward to Purdue in the Big Ten championship again.
Oh my gosh, like, ugh.
Or whoever's leading
Nebraska.
The other side. I don't even know who it is. Wisconsin, maybe.
Who
Iowa.
cares?
Yeah,
like,
Minnesota now.
It's Minnesota now.
Well, I was 6-1. I mean, I don't know. They're 6-2 now, I guess.
I don't know if we're not even going to really talk about them that much. I don't know if you saw the stat. How many yards did Ohio have in the second half offensively against Minnesota?
Iowa.
Iowa.
They had like 2 yards.
2 yards.
Because it's backups. Or like their star quarterback was out, and Minnesota's star backup quarterback was out. But like the level of play was just like Penn State, Ohio State. It was so boring to watch.
And the thing about it, people are going to make more of a deal. And I get, yes, the punt should have happened. I didn't see it as a fair catch. You can get into the logistics of the rules and the technicalities. If you forget about that one play, you still sit back and you go, yo, someone should be fired for this head coaching performance. Like, and it's not the first time that Iowa has set
been
back.
Like that for like the last 2 years, 3 years. They don't score points.
No. It's like they got a good defense, but if they don't score more than a touchdown, then you're probably going to beat this team. And sure enough, that's what happens. Like,
four field goals.
But Penn State, like, I wanted to pull this out of James Franklin. So James Franklin, on the road versus top 25 teams. He's played 14 times. He's 2-12.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, we said this at the beginning of the year. Penn State has looked better than I think we were giving them credit for. But we said this at the very beginning of the year. Penn State has always just been a stepping stone for Ohio State or Michigan or both.
Or both.
Like they do this every single year. They beat a bunch of teams, look real good. Everybody's like, oh, they're a good team. I think this is our year. And then they lose to Ohio State and Michigan. Like they're just a resume booster for those two teams.
And no one questions that they're a top 10 team because those are the only two teams they played in Ohio State and Michigan. Everyone else was no one. But we still sit back. And so versus top 10 teams, he's played 10 games. He's 0-10. Versus Ohio State, James Franklin's 1-9. And against top 5, he's 1-12.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their schedule, like, and again, like you said, we don't question it, but we question all these other teams of like, oh, their schedules are weak. And it's like, well, who's Penn State played? West Virginia, Delaware, Illinois, Iowa, which I'll give you, they put up 31-0 on Iowa. Now, the nothing is whatever because we already talked about Iowa can't score, but putting 31 points up on Iowa's defense, fine. That looks good, but Iowa just lost to Minnesota. Like, they're not a great football team, right? And then Northwestern and Massachusetts. Like, give me one good school there that, like, really Penn State deserved to be top 10. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, again, because, you know, everybody else is struggling, all this other stuff going on, but, like, it just happens every single year where we think Penn State is like this, hey, they're doing it, and like look how, you know, good the Big Ten is, when we just know what's going to happen because we called this at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's just set down because now there's no chance that Ohio State loses 2 games.
Now,
so
to like help Penn State, get into it now.
You know, if they beat Michigan, then they have a head-to-head. Ohio State would have to lose 2 with a head-to-head loss for them to get in the Big Ten. It's coming down to the game again. Like, whoever wins Ohio State, Michigan's going.
And that's how it's been. I mean, as long as I can remember, basically, if whoever wins that game is basically the Big Ten, which I think hopefully when we have this conference realignment, they do kind of what the other conferences have gone to, where it's just
they've already said they're going to
good, because it's just this whole like East versus West thing, or whatever it used to be, like Legends versus do you remember
Champions?
Champions, whatever, a few years ago. Like, let's
get rid of it, because the problem is that you can't honestly sit back, and I get that maybe 20 years ago Ohio State and Michigan have always been there, and maybe on the other side of the football, like back in the 90s when Nebraska was there, it was more of a competition, but you can't that's been known. Whoever wins the game is going to be the Big Ten champion. It's just a matter of who wins this game. Now, up until the last 2 years, it's been Ohio State's just been dogging Michigan. Now, Michigan looks good. Based upon how bad McCord looks right now, I would say Michigan is going to hand it to Ohio State. And the good news for Michigan is they play Ohio State in Michigan. Like, it helps them out. Now, they have to get through the whiteout at Penn State. But I was saying this a few weeks ago, doing it solo, is that for Penn State, them not meeting Michigan, like with the Big Ten championship like game on the line, it ruins it. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, like, even if Michigan loses to Penn State, which that's a far-fetched, if Michigan then goes and beats Ohio State, it's still Michigan.
I think it is still Michigan,
right? Because like it's a round robin, but Michigan is gonna own over Ohio State.
I'd have to actually look to see how that works out when it's a 3-way tie with the one loss, but it's that round robin if they all have a loss to one another. I don't know how that shakes out. That's a good question. I'll have to look that up because I don't know. But that sort of rounds out the Big Ten in terms of it's really now down to Michigan and Ohio State, and then you got the ACC. 2 big games. The one that I didn't expect to go the way it was Virginia, shocking UNC.
I think it's just another clear example that like this has been happening for a really long time. The SEC has been kind of excluded from it because they've always had kind of like multiple teams that are available, or like, if Alabama's the one that gets upset, like Georgia's right there, and or like LSU. But every other conference for like quite a while now has this happen to them. It's like you have this one team that's like, this can be our year if they just keep winning, and then some random act of Virginia happens, and all of a sudden North Carolina's hopes are shot.
Yeah, I mean, even if they were to win out and beat Florida State now I get that that's a big thing to say that you'd still leave them out. It really depends on who else is left.
Yeah, but again, like,
but it's a horrendous loss.
Yeah, you start comparing losses, like one-loss teams, losing to Virginia, not helping.
No,
not helping.
You even put them against a one-loss Alabama if they were to make it all the way, or a one-loss, say Texas, they beat Oklahoma.
Yeah,
like
it's not
close.
No.
You can't sit back and look at a team that was 1-5. You're a 23.5 point. The only time I remember this happening, and they actually got left out, was when Alabama snuck in and played Georgia in the Natty and won it all. When Alabama didn't win the conference, but Ohio State had gotten demolished by Purdue that year at night. I'm not sure if you remember that game, but like
that was the
there was that sick kid.
Yeah.
And Purdue,
the spoiler makers, dude.
I think it was Moore was the guy that's playing for the Cardinals now.
Rondale Moore.
Yes, he was on Purdue.
Yeah.
And they could not be. Every time Purdue touched the ball, they scored.
I remember that game, dude. I watched it live. Yeah, that was intense.
It was awesome. I mean, it was unreal. But they literally, I remember the committee was like, no, we could not overlook the loss to Purdue.
Well,
like,
that was just the ESPN showing the SEC bias.
Here we go again.
They got Auburn was in the Alabama wasn't even in the SEC championship game. It was Auburn, Georgia.
Correct.
So like Auburn got punished by playing an extra game. Because if it would have just finished as is, I don't even think it would have been Ohio State, Alabama. I think it would have been Auburn that got in.
Correct. The only thing that helped the committee in that was Alabama. I'm saying in hindsight.
Yeah, that's how sports are. Like we've talked about this. Rankings are stupid. It doesn't matter. The best team doesn't always win. It's why you play the game.
It's funny that you bring up the rankings not matter because we were laughing about it downstairs. It should, when we go to 12-team playoff, in my opinion, it should go to like top 15 because then it tells you who at least the top 12 are.
And then the first couple that are out.
Based upon a coach's opinion, but it's top 25. And James Madison is the number 25. And I'm not trying to take like a super just shot at James Madison.
Who cares?
Yes.
Who cares?
But anyone that sits back and is like, James Madison's going to compete against someone unranked like, say, Miami or Clemson. I'm sorry. It's not going to, like, there's too much depth on those schools.
We talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, from like 20, or we call it like maybe 18 to 25, it's basically just like the middle of the SEC, just like, we're beating each other, and we're just going to keep saying that the next person, whoever
I've
wins,
got 5
is
top
ranked.
25 wins this year.
Lose to Florida, but then beat Tennessee. You become ranked.
God, it drives me insane.
Yeah.
With some of it, because you sit back and you're like, dude, like, what are we doing? Like, and like you said, it's a self-licking ice cream cone. Like, we literally sit back and you're like, well, we had to do it because now it gives this team a ranked win. It's like, no, it's just like when Georgia played Kentucky. Like, yes, I get Kentucky
or
was
Texas plays Kansas.
Oh my gosh! Like, you sit back and you're like, dude, this is not a quality win. Like, it's still a trash win. It's still trash. Like, you just happen to call this trash like recyclable, and now it looks good, and it's not. Like,
well, and they use it both ways. Like, they'll use it looking backwards, or like, oh, well, remember when we beat Kansas? They were a ranked team. But then they'll also go back and look and go, well, hey, we had to play Kansas when it was a ranked team. Like, they'll use it looking back and like in the present of like, we've got a top 25 matchup going on. This is going to be a big win for Texas. And in reality, it's like, no, it's not. Like, it would have just been a big loss if they would have lost, but they should have won. So they, you can't use that as like their schedule all of a sudden got harder.
And this is the reason I bring this up before going to this team is I sort of wanted to set the stage with this because I'm like torn on this team, which is Florida State. So Florida State, you look at them, and I think that, are they a good football team? Yes. Like, and especially with, you look at their offense, like Coleman, other guys, like you just sort of sit back and like, dude, they've got some pieces. Like, they have a good football team. However, when it comes to like ranking them, I think this is why the committee sort of had, like, they're sitting at 4. I think they'll probably jump up to 3, just after the win versus Duke. It's a good win. Penn State loses. Other things are going to happen.
No, they're still 4.
Oh, so they are still 4.
Yeah, it's Georgia, Michigan,
Ohio
State, Florida State.
And the reason I don't think they jump is that you look at the win versus LSU and you go, hey, it's not the LSU team that we thought it was. LSU can't find a defense to save their life unless they're playing Army, and
Still no defense to be found.
yeah, still no defense. God bless. Worst thing that happened to Army since pulling out of Afghanistan, just getting pummeled. And I felt bad for Army because it was like they were 30-point underdogs, and I was like, I'll give Army a shot. As I told you, I turned on the CV and I was like, yeah, it was 60-0.
Yeah, I think they had more than 30 at halftime.
Yeah, which it's funny, they painted the end zones camo, the end zones, and I was like, oh, no wonder Army couldn't find them. They were hidden. But Florida State, to me, like, you look at them and you go, they get a good win against Duke. They are a better program than they have been historically, but neither one of those are like these big, huge wins. Like the Clemson win, still good, but they all should have lost that game if not for that fumble. I just sort of sit back with Florida State and I'm like, this is a team that it's like, could they win it all? 100%. Could they lose it all, like, and get blown out like TCU in the championship? 100%. Like, I can't get a good vibe for this team because it feels like they're just sort of like UNC. Like, they're just one slip up. They don't seem to have everything clicking that if they went in and played a C game or something against Miami, that they could still win.
And you've kind of talked about this a few times. There's like these programs now. Florida State has fallen out of favor, kind of a long time ago. But like, you have these programs where like, yeah, Florida State loses, it's pretty much like they're done. Like everybody's like, you're done. But if like Ohio State or Michigan loses, are they done? No. Why though? Why? Like what's the difference? Right? And like we've all been brainwashed into it because all we do is watch ESPN because that's all that there is, and ESPN does it. They've brainwashed all of us into thinking that like these big named all the time schools that are there have always an opportunity to get in, and they've done it to us with the Alabamas or in the LSUs that have gone from like 7th to 3rd over a weekend for no apparent reason. But then you have these teams like Florida State who have a great year, then lose one game, and it's like, almost, you had it, bye. Now we're going to let the Ohio State Michigans in again.
Well, I mean, Georgia's still ranked number 1, which I get. This is Associated Press, who, in my opinion...
They watch the same stuff we, though. I mean, they're all just human beings that get influenced just like we do.
I get that, and I feel like they're more just like, I can't be the guy that doesn't vote Georgia number 1, and I sit back and I'm like, Georgia's not the number 1 team.
No.
Like, and for me, they're not even my top 4. Like, if you were to put teams in, I know that sounds like heresy, but it's just like based upon the product that they've put out. Like, is Florida State a better team? Yeah, Florida State has better wins. Like, I get that the wins aren't as good as they were at the beginning of the season, but Florida State's played people. Like, Ohio State had to play Penn State. Michigan, they haven't let an opponent score more than 10 points. Like, you just sort of like sit back and look through those, and you're like, dude, these other teams have come to play. Like, Georgia's getting credit for being the back-to-back undefeated national champions. But
those teams were great. But I think everybody would easily agree that this team is nowhere near, like not even close to either one of those teams' caliber. And now they've lost Brock Bowers.
Yeah, and I said it downstairs. We'll see if it comes true. I could see it will take both of these teams, their offenses just being clicking. Like, and I think they have a chance. Ole Miss and Tennessee. Like, if there's a team, especially with Brock Bowers being down, like, it's not this. I saw some people saying online, like, oh, will they have another 5-star? And it's like, I get that. Every team does. And I prove it with, look at your quarterbacks. Like, look at Alabama. Look at Alabama's offensive line. They went out and got the number 1 offensive tackle. They put him at left tackle, and it's like, hey, he's gotten better each and every week. But at the beginning of the season, you're like, yo, who's this guy blocking out on the left? Like, this dude's awful. Like, it's just not this film. Georgia's not going to bring some guy out, and everyone's like, oh, the next Brock Bowers. Like, it's generational. Like,
oh yeah, he's phenomenal.
You're not going to go find a guy that just replaces him.
Yeah, he's the one. He's. There's not a lot of guys. There's guys that you're like, oh yeah, he'll play in the NFL, but he's one of those guys that like has NFL level talent right now.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that's special about him is like you could put him on an NFL field right now, and he would still do well.
Do exactly what he's doing right now.
Yeah.
Like, he took over the Auburn game. when Georgia needed. So it's funny you said this earlier.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. It's like once it's like they forget that they have Brock Bowers and they're like struggling, and you're like, oh, this is kind of a game. And then like the coach remembers, like, hey, let's throw it to that guy. And all of a sudden you're like, dude, you could have literally ran that play 100 times straight and they would have never stopped it. Like, you just throw it to Hulk hands and he will score the ball. Like
100%. And they just it humors me that they've gotten this far, and without him, does Georgia still have enough pieces to beat Ole Miss, Tennessee? 100%. Like, it's just a matter of if Georgia comes in and they play like they did against Auburn, not well, and they, especially at Neyland, like if it's a night game and Neyland comes, if they can come out like they did against Bama and go up, 20-7 going in a half, they're not coming out a half going in to Bryant-Denny. They're in front of a home crowd.
Yeah.
Like, that place will be rocking.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, dude, I don't know what happened to Tennessee. There was I don't think Bama really changed that much. Like they stepped up their game, but it wasn't like they all of a sudden made all these adjustments. Watching that game, dude, Tennessee just looked so scared. It was like they were in the lead, but didn't they were like, oh my God, we're in the lead. We don't know what to do with it. And like, I feel like Ole Miss is the same way when they play Bama. Something about like, Lane Kiffin and Saban, they have this fear of like, Saban's going to do it to us. I don't know if they're going to have that same fear against Georgia. So
outside of the Arkansas game, Alabama in the second half against South Florida, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and now Tennessee has allowed how many points in the second half against those four teams?
I don't know.
3.
3 points?
3 points total, and that was the Texas A&M. Like, and Mississippi State. So you look at like those schools and you're just like, wow, like Bama's defense has found a way to do what they haven't done in the past few years as a Bama fan sitting there watching. Like, they were terrible the past few years with second half adjustments.
So when Bama plays Georgia in the SEC championship, bet the under on the first half and the over on the second half. Got it.
Well, no, you do the opposite. You bet the over first half, under
there you go.
the second. So, but you just sort of sit back, and we'll get to Bama here in a second and sort of SEC, but like rounding out with like Florida State, like I just sort of sit back and I'm like, if you put them on a neutral field with Georgia, I'd give the edge to Florida State. Like, and I think that you could argue with a lot of the other outside. I wouldn't do it to Ohio State. I just don't like McCord. Like,
no, I don't think Ohio State's the number 3 team in the nation either. Like when you kind of talk about who they've played. Yeah, they played Notre Dame, but again, that was a weak-looking game. They're going to, turn it out to like, oh, it was a defensive battle. Like, it was a weak-looking game. That Penn State game, yeah, it was a struggle on both sides, but like a weak-looking game. Like, they don't look. How are you leaving Washington out of the playoff right now? Like, when
I'm not.
No, I'm not. I know you're not, but like when you're looking at the AP poll, like how do you look at those teams and like who they've played in the games that they've won? Like, how can you sit back and legitimately say that Washington shouldn't be in the top 4?
I agree. And for Ohio State, I think the thing that the Notre Dame game showed, the Maryland game and other games have showed, if you as a defensive coach can shut down Marvin Harrison Jr., you're going to win the game.
You're going to triple team that guy.
You're going to win. Like, you have a great chance to win the game. Like, if you can do that, you probably are going to win this game. Like, Notre Dame did it, and it wasn't until they only put 10 guys out on the field that Ohio State drove it down the field. But, like, and now Marvin Harrison, in my opinion, we'll get into this when we get into the USC game, I think is starting to show, like, he should probably be the first overall pick. Like, the dude is extremely talented, and it's difficult for guys to wrap their heads around in the league, taking a wide receiver number 1.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I'm not disagreeing you with the level of talent. It's just, when's the last time a wide receiver's been the number 1 pick?
You don't know? USC went to the Jets. It was the last time.
USC went to the Jets?
Yep. He's on a talk show on ESPN, or he was.
USC went to the Jets?
Yeah.
He was a wide receiver?
Yeah. After that, he played for the Bucks. Those are the 2 main teams that I know that he played for.
I don't know.
It's Keyshawn Johnson.
Oh man, yeah, that there you go, way back, in the
Way
day.
back.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been since him as a wide receiver went first.
I mean, there you
overall.
go. And again, I'm not disagreeing with the talent. I don't see that happening because of just what else you can get. That number one pick is more valuable than that wide receiver. And if someone who, like, say it's the Bears are like, we want Marvin Harrison, they could probably trade that number one pick for something else and then still get Marvin Harrison at like 2 or 3.
I 100% agree. From an NFL standpoint, what you can get for the picks, it's worth way more than the player. In terms of who do I think the best guy coming out of college is right now, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. And honestly, outside of like offensive lineman, defensive lineman, I'd probably put Brock Bowers up there. Like from the offensive standpoint, like it's you look around the NFL and you're like, hey, you want a tight end? Like they're hard when you find a truly special one that is able to catch the football consistently and get open. Like, because let me tell you, every single defense in the SEC is like, hey, if we're going to guard anybody, we're guarding that guy.
Yeah.
And it's so like Travis Kelce watching him tonight. It's like, still can't guard the dude. Like, somehow this guy finds his way open.
It's coming and somehow can't stop it.
Still got over 100 yards.
Yeah.
Like, it's so frustrating to watch, especially in the opposing team. But that's how good of a player he is. We'll change gears and go to a different conference. And this conference had 2 really good scares, and it helped. One of them was for sure helped by the officials, which was the Oklahoma versus UCF, and then Texas versus Houston. And the Houston game was helped by the refs. I don't care how it's not that they lost the game, but it didn't help them that both the defender and the running back's body was over the 9-yard line. And they were like,
this
short.
weekend was really bad for referees. Like the amount of missed calls that keep happening. And I think we've talked about this, like that we need to do something, right? Like I'm not talking about like robots on the field, but like we have technology. I know that exists to make calls like this less frequent in these big important games. Like it's just, and I don't think anybody's out there unless you're on the receiving end of it that specific game, but I don't think anybody's out there going like, yeah, bad calls by the ref are part of the game and we love it. You know what I mean? Like nobody likes bad calls. And I know like when it happens for your team, you're like, yeah, but deep down you're kind of just like, man, that was a bad call. Because if it was the other way around, you'd be throwing
it's just a matter
stuff
of time till
TV.
it comes around.
Yeah, like and again, we talked about this is more NFL, but when they did that Toy Story broadcast, they had these little dudes on the TV running around playing live, and you're like, how are they doing that? They've got computer chips in their pads. All right, now if you can do that, put a computer chip in a ball, right? You got lasers on the field for the first down lines and the chains. Some dude's foot tossed the ball to another guy who's also trying to figure out where the other guy's foot is and laying it down, and then you got 2 guys running out stretching a chain. Are you kidding me? Like,
oh no,
the inaccuracy of that. It blows my mind, and it creates so many situations like this Texas-Houston game where it's just a bad call. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and it totally changes the game, and I hate to see that.
100%. Well, it's not even just with like, I'm a big proponent, because we were talking about earlier, of putting a chip in a ball. I mean, you literally do both ends and one in the middle, and like, hey, what's the furthest point that this ball was at in this play? Well, and you could even freeze it like, hey, the player's knee's down here. Where does the ball say that it's at right now? Well, that's where it's at. Like, and I don't think anyone sits back and goes, well, I'd really like to see a human being, come up with that play. It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Like,
I want to see some guy walk in with his foot and put it down, like.
Yeah, the ref that got blasted over the sideline and fell down, he's now getting up. Be like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, because half the time, these guys are running 4-3s. Ain't no ref running 4-3s. They're usually 10 yards behind the play, running up going like, oh, yeah, I think it was there. Like, it's nowhere near it. It's always a bad spot.
And it's so quick now that literally the computer can tell you it's here. Guy in the headphones like, yeah, you put it at the 37 just so, the nose of the football is on that hash. Done. Like, it's so simple, but we fail to do it. And it ultimately, as you sort of, it affects games. Like, and it affects more than just that game. Like,
how many times have you seen like it's like a close play or like a pile up, and the ref comes running in, and as he's running in, he's like changing his spot, like because he's looking at where the ball is as he's running in.
I get
Guy
tickled
has no idea.
when you see him running in from opposing sides.
Two separate sides,
two separate like lines,
Yeah.
and you're like, "Wow, I wonder which one they're gonna go with."
Yeah, one guy's calling fourth down, the other guy's already going, "Yeah, move the chains." Like it's so bad. Like we need to get rid of that part of the game.
Yes, and the other thing is like I wish that they would sit back. Like I saw it in this week's game that I was like, "Oh, give us a pylon camera," and then I look at the pylon, it's like
They don't even have one.
Yeah, it's like, how much is that? Like, if you're that should, and this is why the NCAA just sucks. Like I found it funny that the NCAA, I don't know if you saw this a few weeks ago, they were like, "Hey, we have a rule change," and everyone's like, "Oh, I wonder what it's going to be." No more photo shoots with recruits. That's what the NCAA banned photo shooting recruits. But the NCAA couldn't come out and be like, "Hey, if you're going to play in the NCAA, you got to have pylon cams. Like, spend the money. I don't care how much it is. Like, you got to have these cameras because we're no longer going to sit back and go, I wonder if the ball got across the goal line."
I can't tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is like, we have the money. Like, it's a $1 billion organization, same as the NFL. It's like, you have the ability to put these things in the field.
If you could pay a junior in high school $100,000, you could put a camera in a pylon.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, a Southern Cal recruit,
2026 recruit, no
Yes.
less.
So he's
2026.
a junior.
He's a junior in high school. Kid is 16 years old, maybe.
got paid six figures by a
Trading card
company with an NIL deal, which good for the kid. I think
yeah,
we both
not mad at him. Not mad at him.
But I sit back and I'm like, you guys are morons. Like, what? Talk about that is literally like trying to win the lottery. Like, that's what it is. Like, I think about Bama all the time. You look at the amount of 5-stars that have come into that program that they were like, this dude's the next one. And then you're like, where did that dude go? Oh, he's at East Texas? Oh, yeah, he sucked. Like,
you can just go look back at any year of like Max Prep's 5-star,
Oh
like
my
top
gosh.
10 5-stars that came out of whatever state. And like, you've probably only heard of 2 of them. You know what I mean? And like, that's just, I'm not saying that those other guys aren't good. It's just the sheer number of people. It's just hard to compete when you get on that next level.
you can go to the NFL draft. You can be the San Francisco 49ers and take Mr. Irrelevant. He's taking you to the playoffs every year, but the Jets can't draft a quarterback.
Jets fans.
That's one of my favorite tweets of all times. This guy said that he's like, I've been a fan for 40 years and we can't draft a quarterback, and the 49ers just take some dude at Mr. Irrelevant.
It works out for them.
But, those, you got OU and Texas. Both, for me, this week is another trap game for Texas. They play BYU. And I think it's just because of our history with BYU. BYU, like, they are a team that they're going to come in and play well. Like, they're sort of like Utah. Like, I don't care how Utah's doing. I don't care how BYU's doing. They are a disciplined football
They're
team.
tough. Yeah.
And
They're tough and
They're
disciplined.
not going to quit. Like, if you're expecting a team that you get up by 2 or 3 touchdowns, then lay down, that's not BYU. I would not be shocked to see it close to an upset. Like, it's just, I feel like Texas is sort of leaning that way too right now, that you're just sort of like, and Oklahoma as well, that you're like, I don't know if either one of these teams are as good as people think they are.
I think that's true. But again, I don't necessarily think that's a shot at Oklahoma or Texas. I think that's how football is. And like, especially these last few years, like recruits are going other places, and like teams are they're better than they normally are. There's not these like huge blowouts anymore, and like football games are close. That's what happens. We've been so lulled into this like Georgia and Alabama are blowing everybody out by 70 every week that like when games like this happen, it's like, ooh, maybe Texas isn't that good. No, this happens every year, right? Like, it's just, I would agree with you. I think though, usually in games like that, like when an Oklahoma and a Texas has these scares against teams that they had no business being scared by, it maybe wakes them up a little bit, right? Like, because they are thinking like, maybe not Texas, but like Oklahoma for sure, like, whew, we beat Texas. That was our competition. Now it's smooth sailing to the CFP. And they kind of forget that they need to show up every week.
Yeah.
And then they get scared into like, ooh, that was our one shot, and like it almost got taken away from us. Like, let's not let that happen again. And maybe they show up a little better prepared and more focused. But, who knows?
And I think both of those teams will. The thing that will hurt either one of those teams is, especially Texas, maybe not so much Oklahoma, it would still hurt them in terms of the playoff. If Texas loses again, then they're going to lose again. They'll lose a third just because once you have that win taken out of yourselves, they're still playing knowing that, hey, we go undefeated for the rest of the year. We're playing Oklahoma. We write our own.
Yeah.
We're in control of our own destiny. We'll see how it happens. There's nothing else to talk about the Big 12 because outside of those two teams, until they meet up, like they're not. It's just games like BYU and others that you're just like, we'll see what happens. Before I'm going to save the Pac-12 for last, just because I know that's going to be a little bit more of a conversation. We talked a little bit about Bama. I'm here to tell you, I'm not putting Bama in. They're not even in. If my top 10 teams in the nation, they're number 10. Like, I don't have Bama up there because Bama has not consistently ran the football. Like, and you can sit back and be like, oh, well, you're not even going to talk about the quarterback. If Bama could find a running, that's the worst thing that could happen for anyone that's anti-Bama is if Bama can figure out how to run the football and their offensive line starts blocking more. With their defense playing well, good luck. Like, they have in my opinion, the greatest football coach to have ever lived in college. Like, they're going to find a way to be difficult to beat. I don't care who you play them against. Like, they're not a team that anyone wants to line up with.
Yeah, see, that's where I go. It depends on like how you're ranking, right? Like the way the committee ranks and the way that I think we rank are differently. So top 10, I would say, yeah, just because again, Bama looks very average this year. However, Bama's average is still better than like 90% of the nation because of the coaching and the resources that they have at their disposal. Like, they are going to adjust mid-game better than most schools, and they still have, although not necessarily performing like it, they still have a handful of 5-stars and 4-star recruits that can still just be athletes at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so when I look at Bama, they have LSU, they get a bye week, play LSU. That's a huge, I can't emphasize enough. It'll be a great game. Like, the first week in November is always fantastic because that's going to be in Bryant-Denny. It'll probably be at night. It'll be a dogfight the whole time. LSU still has a chance to control it. If they beat Bama and run the table, they'll meet Georgia most likely in the SEC championship.
Yeah, because they've got 2 losses, but one of them was out of conference.
Correct.
So
they still control their own destiny. If they can get now, the funny thing is I think that LSU will find a way. I know that this is crazy to say, but they struggle with this team, Texas A&M. Like, watch, they'll lose to Texas A&M again this year. Like, I don't know what it is about them and Texas A&M. It's sort of like Alabama and Auburn. Like, anytime those two teams meet up, it's just that. Like,
regardless of the rankings, all bets are off the table.
All bets are off the table.
Fight,
Like, this is a different ball game. Like, it just is. That's sort of their nemesis right now. Like, as much as everyone's like, oh, it's Bama. Like, Bama and them are pretty evenly matched, but I don't care how bad Texas A&M is. Like, they find a way to play LSU pretty well. They did last year. Like, it really knocked LSU out of the playoff race because LSU beats Alabama and everyone's like, oh, they'll face Georgia. And what happens the very next week? They lost A&M. And they struggled versus Arkansas, get blown out in the SEC championship. The only other SEC team I'll talk about, since we only talked about Georgia, is the other team that I think can play Georgia and beat them, which is Ole Miss. Like, Ole Miss to me it's a weird year for them because the past 2, like, offensively, they've just been like 50, 60 points a game. Like, you haven't seen that explosiveness from them, but you have against like LSU. Like, LSU offense is clicking, darts throwing darts. Like, just, they look really good. If they can play Georgia like that, they have a good chance, especially with Bowers being out.
Yeah, their offense is good enough. And Georgia's defense isn't as dominant as they used to be. Like, their offense is good enough to put up points on Georgia. And
What Ole Miss team do you see? Do you see them that came out against Bama?
Yeah,
that struggled.
And it's exactly with Georgia. Like if Georgia comes out and plays like they did against Kentucky, Ole Miss is it's going to be a much better game. But like if Georgia comes out and plays like they played against at least to start like Ball State or Vanderbilt or
Auburn,
like. They came out slow, and if you come out slow and let Ole Miss get up by a few, like Georgia's doesn't have that offense where they're going to like score a bunch of points quickly. So, I'd
argue they don't have the defense either. That it's like, hey, this defense is going to go out. We're down by 3 scores. They're going to go get 3 and outs each drive. It's like that's not Georgia. They're not the dominant defense.
No.
They're still a good defense. Don't get me wrong, but they're just not that level of dominance that you've seen the last 2 years. That you're like, hey, our defense is going to win this game.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, last year it was sort of silly. At some point, you could almost just say, I think Georgia could run the ball every single play, never throw it, and they're still going to win this football game.
Yeah, they could kneel the ball. They could just not even play offense, but they're probably going to score on defense enough times that they'll win a game.
Yep, and that's just not this year.
Yeah.
The SEC, and the reason I talk about the SEC before talking about this last conference, in my opinion, the SEC is on the outside looking in. Now, I get from a committee, this is my opinion, just sort of how I see it. The committee's not going to see it that way, and we've had heated discussions over that. We're both in the same boat on that. But it's one of these ones where I look at, for me, and I'll just get into it real quick, my top 4, I've got Michigan number 1, Washington number 2, Florida State, and then my surprise is I've got Oregon at number 4 ahead of Ohio State just because I really like Oregon's defense. Like, it was neck and neck against Washington. And Oregon, outside of that, has played better, I'd argue, than probably Washington has. Like, Oregon really hasn't been scared in a game like Washington. It just happened. The biggest thing for the Pac-12 that we can probably get into is sort of your biggest fear with the Pac-12 of it. Can someone escape?
Yeah, and again, I talked about this already. Like, this has happened plenty of years. It's just we end up doing this round robin of beating people, and because nobody really comes out as like the clear definitive winner, the way the conference looks at it is, and especially because it's the Pac-12, because they're on the West Coast and they don't get the views like everybody else does, you kind of just look at the box scores and go, well, they all kind of beat each other. Nobody's really that dominant. Let's just look elsewhere. And when you have teams like Oklahoma and Florida State that are like right there on the edge, just like, come on, hey, look, we're undefeated. If Oklahoma comes out undefeated and it's a 1-loss Washington to, whatever, Utah or USC or something like that, but Washington is the Pac-12, I don't know. I don't know what the committee would do.
I agree with you. It sucks because at the end of the day, I think that if their games happen on East Coast time, it would be a different feel. Like, the prime one for me is like Washington barely escapes against Arizona State, takes a pick 6 with like 8 minutes to go in the 4th for them to win that game. If that had been Georgia, people like on ESPN the next morning, they're like, hey, I think Georgia should not be in the top spot. Like,
yeah.
There's this huge commotion about it, and it's because that game didn't kick off until like 10 p.m.
Nobody saw it.
No one saw it. And so people are like, they just wake up and they're like, oh, Washington barely survived. Okay.
Well, at least they won.
They won.
Yeah, at least they won. Yeah.
And even when they lose, people are like, oh, okay, they lost. Like, it's not this attention getter that.
Yeah, the impact isn't driven home. Like,
correct. And exactly what you said. The good thing for Washington is their biggest test. They have 2 really still big tests. They got Utah and USC. I get USC, unfortunately, is out of the playoff race right now because even if they ran the table, beat Washington, beat Oregon, win the Pac-12, I just don't see them putting in a 2-loss team.
I don't either. And even if, especially if it's USC, simply because their defense is a nationwide laughingstock. I mean, like, never has a team with, I'll say, such a high percentage chance of making the playoff at the beginning of the season been such a one-sided, like, lopsided team, right? Like, everybody knows the offense can score points. And to even that, like, Caleb Williams hasn't looked very good the last 2 weeks, and they've lost. But even before that, it was always just like dude, USC's defense isn't there. And it's one thing to like have a not that good of a defense, but your offense makes up for it. Their defense is straight bad. And like everybody's talking about it, right? So like that will be the narrative when it comes down to like, hey, but we won the Pac-12. Doesn't matter. Your defense is terrible. We're not going to put you in because whatever, XYZ.
And I feel bad for Caleb Williams. I mean, I was taking a look. They put up a stat in the middle of the game that I was like, wow, that's, I was not expecting that stat. So against the non-top 25, he's had 23 starts, completion percentage 70%, passing yards a game, 17 yards. He's thrown 78 touchdowns and 7 interceptions against non-top 25. Against top 25, he's had 5 starts, 51% completion rate difference from that 70. Instead of 317 yards, he's averaged 172 yards a game. And his touchdown interception ratio goes from 78-7 to 6-6. Like
it's not good. However, I do think that's a little. I don't know the numbers, but I think it's like a convenient, and they're doing it intentionally. What does everybody else? What does everybody else do against top 25?
Oh, I'm not arguing that.
Like look at Bo Nix. Bo Nix is famous for it.
Oh,
man, chokes in big games.
Yes.
It's a thing, right? Like that happens to everybody. You play better competition, your stats go down.
Caleb Williams is immensely talented. Like there was this play, I saw it that I was like, man, like there's maybe like 1 or 2 guys in college right now that can make that throw. He is running for his life to the left side of the field. He's right arm. Like I can tell you, after playing the position quarterback, this is a difficult throw. Full speed throw, and throws a rope on the sideline, hits him. When he threw that pass, I'm like, that's what scouts see, and they're like, that's the guy.
See, and that's what it's like. He's not going to win the Heisman again this year. They're probably not going to win the Pac-12, but he is still, in my opinion, the best player in college football and has the best transferable talent to the NFL.
I think that the reason he will still be the number 1 pick is because quarterbacks touch the ball every play, and no one's willing to pass up on him. Like no one's willing to be like, hey, let me take a chance and not draft this guy and trade back instead of taking him. Like it's just not going to happen. But from that standpoint of those 3, it's really now sort of a 2-team race, even though it's really not. I'll get into that because I was showing you earlier because I heard it during the game and I was like, I didn't even know that. So I think many people believe it's between Washington and Oregon. Like those are the 2 teams.
Yeah, they're just waiting for that rematch now.
Correct. But it's not. So when Utah beat USC, their only loss this year was Oregon State. With both
which is a good football team.
Which is a good football team. Utah will play Oregon and Washington. If Oregon State and Utah win out, then they'll face one another again in the Pac-12 championship, which is...
I think that's kind of far-fetched, though.
Far-fetched.
Yeah.
Like, I think the biggest thing that I can see happening, I think Oregon wins out. They play USC and they play Utah this week, which for me, I know that there will be Utah and Oregon's really the only big game next week outside of Georgia, Florida, which isn't a big game. They'll make it into a big game because it's
it's a good rivalry.
The largest cocktail party in the South. But outside of that, it's like Utah struggled to beat a bad USC's defense. Took it all the way down to the end to kick a field goal to win. Oregon's got a way better defense.
I'll just say this about Utah though. Like they've done this entire year without Cam Rising. He has not stepped on a football field yet.
It's pretty amazing.
Which I think that speaks to like Whittingham, you know what I mean? Like, and how good of a coach he is, but their defense is really good. And you're right. USC should have won that game. Like that was the best defense USC's probably played all year in the last 2 years, but somehow they couldn't actually score the ball either. Because I talked about USC's only got this much rope for talent in any given game. Typically, it's been completely one-sided to the offensive side, but it looked like the defense maybe pulled some of that rope, but because that's only this long, the offense then struggled because the defense did well. So we ended up losing there at the end. But you're right. Utah should have lost that game. But I do think it's still Oregon and Washington. But again, the way the Pac-12 is, I do think Utah can their defense is good enough to make someone like Bo Nix or Penix have a bad game, and that's all it's going to take where they can win. So I add them there in the 3, but
it'd be hard if Utah comes out and beats Oregon.
If Cam Rising can get on the field too, I think that's
I think they said that Cam Rising's done for the year now.
Did they say that? I thought he still keeps having a chance to play everywhere.
I thought
week.
I read something, and I have to go look at it again. But I was going to ask you about it before we recorded, but I just forgot. I thought I read something that they were like Cam Rising's out for the year, which I mean, hopefully he gets a chance to play next year. I know it's just tough when you blow out a knee like he did. I think so many people just think 6 months later, this guy's going to be back on the field.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not that way. Like, everyone's body heals differently. Utah has to beat Oregon. Like, for Utah, the Pac-12 championship's on the line next week.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and it really is every single week. Like, if Utah wants a chance, they got to win out. For me, Washington's the team that I had to pick a team that's going to lose to someone like USC, it's Washington. Like, Washington has they've shown it twice now against Arizona schools with Arizona and Arizona State that you're like, dude, where's your offense? Like, Penix should be the Heisman favorite, and then they play those two teams, and you're just like, dude, like, I don't know if this team's good. Like, they struggle, and if they come out against USC and have that type of performance, like, USC's going to score points. Like, unless it was against Notre Dame, which they still scored 20, which was more than Washington's offense scored.
With 5 turnovers, nonetheless. Like, think about that. So,
like, they're still a good football team. If I had to pick a team that's going to lose out of the Pac-12 at least one more time, it's Washington. Like, they haven't given me that feeling that I'm like, hey, I know I've got them number 2 right now. It's because they got the second best win.
If I'm going to pick a team out of the Pac-12 to lose another game, it's Colorado. Sorry.
Ugh, Deion. Well, I mean, they play UCLA, and it doesn't get easier for Deion. I mean, they had, just to go back 2 weeks, I didn't talk about it the solo podcast just because I was running through the top, but God, while I was texting you, they were like winning 29-0.
Oh, yeah, they were destroying Stanford.
Eating pizza at Old Chicago, watching them just whoop up on Stanford. I was like, well, I went to bed at half. It was like, and then I woke up.
Yeah, I think you even texted me. You said if Colorado wanted to score 100 points this game, they could.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if they scored for the rest of the game.
I wake up and it was like the first thing that I opened my feed to was like this Stanford wide receiver. Like, this man almost had 300 yards and mossed Travis Hunter. And I'm like, what are we talking about? And I was like, Stanford won? It was just like, Deion's in that locker room, like,
ready to cut people.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like, I cut all these dudes to put you here. I will find replacements for you two. Like, they're just, it's one of these, Colorado, it's catching up to them, the depth. Like, it's not, I know a lot of people are going to make a lot about the showmanship of Colorado. Does that play a factor? Yes. For me, it's the depth of the defensive line, like the depth of the offensive line. Like, they just don't have the bodies. Shocker. Your first year as a
who wants to go to Colorado when they won one game last year?
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to get the recruits. It's not going to happen.
He brought in a bunch of guys, but it doesn't mean that the guy sitting right behind their number 1 defensive tackle is also another number 1 defensive tackle.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to replace. But God, what a yeah. Better bet one more team to lose is Colorado.
It's them. Yeah.
Goodness sakes. But that's sort of I know I've talked about my top 4. So I've got Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Oregon, then Ohio State, and Oklahoma. Then I've got Georgia at 7, Texas at 8. I've got Utah at 9, and then Bama at 10. Like, Utah is that team to me that defensively, I think that they are very, very good. But I know you don't have your whole top 10, but who would be your top 4?
It's Michigan, Washington. I'm going to say Florida State. I'm going, though, Georgia at 4.
Wow.
With Oklahoma at 5. And the reason...
Where do you put Ohio State? 6?
Yeah. Right now, yeah, they're probably at 6. That's probably the logical place to put them. And it's tricky. Like I'm kind of in a mix of like how I actually see it versus like how I think the committee will do it. Like I do think now I don't think Georgia is like they definitely aren't the number 1 team, but based on how everybody else is playing, I can't also like legitimately say that they are worse than Oklahoma. You know what I mean? Like I can't say that they're worse than Ohio State. Now, and because they are still decent and they are undefeated. I know they haven't played anybody, but like I still do think they have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and I'm giving them the nod to 4.
I get that. For me, and we'll sort of wrap it up with this. I will say this: I will hop on this is, rigged, for the SEC
conspiracy theory.
If the committee comes out opening week and puts Georgia at number 1, I'll throw a hissy fit. Like I will be upset because that should happen. I think in like the 1st of November. I know.
You better prepare for it because it's gonna happen.
I'm not gonna lie. I'll be actually pretty upset because I don't think that like now that you have a group of people that are supposed to sit down and be like, who's the best football team?
It's clearly Michigan.
It's clearly Michigan. If Michigan's not the number 1 team by the CFP committee, then you've heard it here all year from you, and you'll hear it from me. Like, ESPN's hand is in the pot, and they're keeping the SEC in this thing when the SEC. There's nobody that should be saying that Georgia's number 1.
The AP poll's kind of doing it right now with the Michigan, Ohio State. Like, yeah, they're both undefeated, but like, really, Ohio State's not number 3. Like, they haven't looked that good, but they're keeping them there knowing that one of those teams is going to beat each other. Like, they're doing it with the intent of like, oh, we got this 2-3 matchup and one of them is going to come out on top. Full well knowing that like you said, like if it came out and the committee had to do it today, they're not putting both those teams in there because they know one of them's going to lose. They're going to have like Oklahoma or an undefeated team somewhere in there. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. We've talked about it enough. I think we beat the dead horse of like how we feel about the rankings, but we'll keep bringing it up because of how silly it is.
Well, this show will change dramatically when right now we're just doing Associated Press, which I get. It's still it's just people ranking teams. But once the committee that are like they are the actual final say on what teams are getting in, when they put out their rankings, it will really show so much more because I think there's a lot to read into it.
Well, and it could change too. Like if Georgia comes out and beats Ole Miss like 50-0 and just absolutely dominates them, everybody's gonna sit back and go, okay, maybe they are that good. Now I don't see that happening when you kind of struggle or start slow with Ball State and those kind of teams, but like that could happen. You know what I mean? All it takes is like one of these teams to lose or slip up. And
I thought that Georgia was back when they just curb stomped Kentucky, and I was like, oh, Vanderbilt can't even build a stadium to start a year. They're going to kill Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And then you're like, hey, did you know Vanderbilt was leading 7-0? I'm like, huh?
Yeah. Should have been 10.
Like, what universe are we in? Did I wake up? Is this a dream? Like,
it's so funny, dude. They had these graphics. Did you watch that game?
No.
Dude, they had these graphics built, and you knew. It was some guy that was like, he spent all this time on these graphics of like, if Vanderbilt wins, this will be their number, their only top 10 win and blah, blah, blah. But like, they probably didn't expect to use that. You know what I mean? All of a sudden it happened, and they were like, get it out there now because this isn't going to last for long. Like, it was like like 10 minutes into the game, dude. Like, it just started, and they were like throwing these graphics up like, what if Vanderbilt wins? What if this happens? It was like, because they knew they weren't going to be able to use them here in a few minutes.
What's crazy is I do remember this was, I was probably high school. I remember for a homecoming game, Mark Rick, like they had Vanderbilt down there, and Vanderbilt beat them. Ugh. And I think it was James Franklin was the head coach.
At Vanderbilt?
At Vanderbilt.
Gosh.
But like, that was a long time ago, but Vanderbilt has beaten Georgia before. Like, that was sort of the downfall of Mark Rick. Like, Mark, great guy. His team always seemed to be there, like, winning, but they always, like, lost the game that you're like
Georgia Tech at the end of the season.
Like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
Like, but glad to have you back. Wrapping up the college episode.
Glad to be back.
Got any other final thoughts?
Nope.
Cool. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you for our NFL episode later this week. Down Pulled Chalks. See you next time.